The village of Mboko lay nestled between rolling hills, where the vast savanna stretched endlessly, dotted with acacia trees, and the sacred forest stood like a dark sentinel at the village's edge. The air was thick with the scent of earth and life, and the sounds of the wind rustling through the tall grasses whispered ancient secrets. This was a village that existed not just in the physical realm, but in the delicate balance between the living and the spirits. The villagers, with their faces worn by the sun and hearts weighed by tradition, lived by the laws passed down through generations. Each day was shaped by the rhythm of the seasons, the guidance of the elders, and the unseen presence of the spirits that watched over them. It was a peaceful village, but under the surface there were always whispers. Whispers of things that should not be disturbed. Whispers of the forest spirits. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of the sacred forest that bordered their village, a place full of both wonder and fear. Elders told tales of spirits who roamed its depths, their presence felt but never seen. There were those who claimed to have heard their voices carried on the wind, their laughter and cries floating through the trees like the rustling of leaves. Some said that the forest spirits protected the village, ensuring the harvests were plentiful and the rains fell when needed. Others warned that breaking the sacred laws of the land would anger these spirits, bringing curses and misfortune upon anyone who dared challenge the old ways. The forest is not just trees, the old women would say. It is the breath of our ancestors. It is the keeper of the land's soul. We must not forget its power. In the heart of this village lived Zalika, a young woman whose beauty was as undeniable as the sun at midday. Her skin shimmered with the golden hues of the earth, and her eyes held the quiet strength of someone who had lived through both joy and hardship. Zalika was known far and wide for her weaving skills. Her baskets, intricate and delicate, were sought by the wealthiest traders and the poorest villagers alike. She wove not just with thread, but with the wisdom of the earth itself, each pattern telling a story, each knot a prayer. But Zalika's beauty was not her only gift. She was independent, strong-willed, and kind-hearted, always the first to lend a hand to those in need. Yet it was precisely these qualities that drew envy from some of the villagers. The older women in particular would often mutter behind her back, questioning her place in the world. They would whisper, "She is too bold for a woman, too proud for a daughter of Mboko." Zalika, however, was not one to be swayed by gossip. Her confidence was her shield and her independence, her strength. One stormy evening, a stranger arrived in the village, his presence as sudden as the clouds that gathered overhead. Kule was his name, and he walked into the market with an air of mystery about him. He was tall, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the veil of the world, seeing things others could not. His clothes were of fine make, yet there was something worn about him, as if he had traveled far and seen much. The villagers watched him warily as he set up his stall, offering strange, foreign trinkets and playing a haunting melody on his flute. The wind seemed to carry his music, and for a moment the world itself fell silent, as though even the spirits of the forest were listening. The market, usually full of the noise of haggling and laughter, became still. Even the children, who normally played in the dust, stopped and stared. Zalika was drawn to him, as if something invisible tugged at her heart. Her feet carried her to his stall where she stood, mesmerized by the music. The melodies were unlike anything she had ever heard before, the notes both beautiful and sorrowful, like the cry of a bird trapped in a storm. "Are you lost, traveler?" Zalika asked, her voice gentle yet curious. Kule looked up at her, his eyes gleaming with an unreadable emotion. "I am not lost, only wandering," he replied, his voice smooth like the river's flow. "I seek refuge, but in truth, I have nowhere to go." There was something about him that unsettled Zalika, yet she could not turn away. He spoke in riddles, his words wrapped in mystery. But the storm had begun to rage. the clouds thick and heavy, and the villagers began to murmur amongst themselves. They knew the old rule: no stranger should be invited into one's home after dark, especially during such a storm. It was said that the spirits would grow angry if a stranger crossed the threshold of a home during this sacred hour, and no good could come of it. But Zalika's heart was moved by his sadness. His loneliness and her compassion overtook her caution. She did not heed the whispers of the villagers as they warned her. Instead, she said, "Come with me. You may rest until the storm passes." As they walked through the village, the eyes of the people followed them, their gazes filled with judgment. The older women shook their heads, muttering under their breath, "Does she not know the danger? The spirits will not forgive this transgression," they whispered. In the quiet of the night, as the winds howled outside, Zalika's aunt, Mwevu, approached her. Her face was drawn with worry, the lines of age etched deep into her brow. Mwevu had always been one to trust in the unseen, the spiritual world that few dared acknowledge. She was known for her wisdom and her connection to the spirits of the forest. "Zalika," Aunt Mwevu said softly, her voice filled with concern, "this is not right. The storm is no ordinary storm, and he is no ordinary man. You have invited trouble into your home, and the spirits will not forgive you for this." Zalika looked at her aunt, her heart torn between the compassion she felt for Kul and the fear that now gnawed at her insides. "But he is alone, Aunt. He is a traveler in need. Is it not right to help him?" Aunt Mwevu placed a hand on Zalika's shoulder, her touch heavy with the weight of generations. "It is right to help, yes, but you must also respect the boundaries set by our ancestors. The spirits will not look kindly upon this. You must be careful." But Zalika, her heart swelling with kindness, brushed aside the warning. "I will be fine, Aunt. The storm will pass, and the morning will bring clarity." As the night wore on and the storm raged outside, the village held its breath. The sacred hour was near, and in Zalika's home, the winds and the spirits seemed to whisper louder than ever. In the village of Mboko, the line between the living and the unseen was thin, and every choice carried the weight of ancestors' eyes watching from the shadows. Zalika's heart was heavy as she guided Kul into her hut. The wind howled outside, but inside the warmth of the fire and the soft glow of the hearth offered comfort. She smiled kindly at him, offering him a bowl of porridge and a woven mat by the fire. "Eat, traveler," she said, her voice gentle. "The storm will pass by morning. You are welcome here." Kul accepted the food with a quiet nod, his eyes scanning the small hut. The walls were adorned with woven baskets, and the shelves were filled with herbs and spices. But among these simple possessions, one item stood out: the carved gourd, hanging from the wall like a silent sentinel. It had been passed down through generations, believed to protect Zalika's family from the spirits of the forest. It was her most prized possession, and she treated it with the utmost reverence. Kule's gaze lingered on the gourd for a long moment. His eyes, dark and intense, seemed to study it as if it were the key to some hidden mystery. "That is a fine piece," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. "What is its story?" Zalika paused, her fingers brushing against the gourd as if to reassure herself. "It is our family's protection," she replied, her voice steady but her mind uneasy. "It has been with us for many generations." Kule nodded slowly, a strange smile tugging at his lips. "It carries great power. I can feel it." Zalika nodded, unsure of how to respond, but the warmth of his presence made her dismiss the unease that stirred in her chest. As the night deepened, a strange stillness settled over the village. Outside, the animals, usually so lively, seemed to grow restless. The wind picked up, howling like a distant cry, and the flames of the fire flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Zalika glanced around, her heart quickening as a cold shiver ran down her spine. Kul, however, remained calm. He sat by the fire, his fingers gently tracing the rim of his bowl, seemingly unaffected by the tension in the air. His demeanor was so serene, almost unnervingly so. Zalika's eyes darted toward the door, half expecting something to appear. The silence outside was unnerving, as if the world itself was holding its breath. But Kul did not seem troubled. He only smiled, his eyes gleaming with an unreadable expression. "You are not afraid?" Zalika asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kule's lips curled into a soft smile. "Fear is an illusion, Zalika. It is only the unknown that frightens us. If we face it, we will see it for what it truly is." Zalika shivered, the room suddenly feeling colder. She turned her gaze to the window where the shadows of the trees seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if reaching for her. The village settled into a strange quiet, as if the land itself was waiting for something to happen. Kul had arrived like a storm, and the storm had not yet passed. Days passed, and Kul became an integral part of the village. His charm was undeniable. He helped rebuild the broken huts, mended the nets used for fishing, and played his haunting flute at dusk. His music, though beautiful, carried with it a strange melancholy that touched the hearts of those who heard it. The villagers, once wary, soon grew fond of him. His presence seemed to have a soothing effect on the people, and even the elders, who were slow to trust outsiders, began to accept him into their fold. But Aunt Mwevu, with her sharp eyes and deeper understanding of the spiritual world, remained wary. She had seen the signs, felt the unease in the air that no one else could sense. She had lived long enough to know when something was not as it seemed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the village gathered around the fire, Aunt Mwevu pulled Zalika aside. "Zalika," she said in a low voice, her eyes scanning the crowd. "There is something wrong with that man. He is not what he appears." Zalika frowned. "Aunt, he is kind and helpful to the villagers. He has done nothing to harm us." Aunt Mwevu's gaze hardened. "It is not what he does, but what he is. He carries the scent of the spirits, and they do not come without reason. He has woven himself into the fabric of this village too quickly, too easily." Zalika's heart tightened. She had felt the same unease, but she had dismissed it, thinking her worries were nothing more than fear of the unknown. But now, Aunt Mwevu's words echoed in her mind like a warning. Days passed, but the unease only grew. Zalika began to notice small things, unsettling things that she had ignored before. Kul's shadow, for instance, never seemed to align with his movements. When he stood in the sunlight, his shadow stretched long and twisted, as though it had a life of its own, and when she looked into the water of the village's well, his reflection seemed wrong, distorted, as if it were not truly his, but something else entirely. Her admiration for Kul began to falter, replaced by a growing suspicion. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Zalika caught sight of him holding the carved gourd, the precious heirloom that had been in her family for generations. He turned it over in his hands, his fingers tracing the intricate designs with an intensity that sent a cold shiver through her. "It is a beautiful piece," Kule said, his voice smooth and cold. His eyes locked with hers, and she felt a chill sweep through her. "It holds power, does it not?" Zalika stood up abruptly, her heart pounding in her chest. "It is only a symbol of our family's protection," she said, her voice trembling. "You should not be holding it." Kule's gaze darkened, his smile fading into something more sinister. "The power of such things is not always as it seems," he said, his words carrying a hidden meaning. "Perhaps it is time for your family to relinquish it." Zalika's breath caught in her throat. She could not explain why, but the fear that had been creeping in for days now blossomed into full-fledged terror. She stepped back, her eyes never leaving him. Later that night, when the village was silent and the stars shone down like watchful eyes, Zalika sought out Aunt Muevu. She found her sitting outside, her gaze fixed on the dark horizon. "Aunt, something is wrong," Zalika said, her voice shaking. "I think Kul is more than he appears." Aunt Muevu did not look at her. "I have seen the signs, child. He is a spirit sent to test us, and you have invited him into our home, into our lives." Tears welled in Zalika's eyes. "What do I do, Aunt?" "I have already let him in. I have already made my choice." Aunt Muevu turned to her, her face etched with sorrow. "You must face what you have brought into this village. The spirits will not forgive this betrayal so easily." That night, as Zalika slept, the dreams came. They were not dreams, but visions, nightmares that clawed at her soul. In the shadows of the dream, Kul's figure loomed, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. His shadow seemed to engulf her, swallowing her whole, and in the center of it all, the carved gourd cracked, its once perfect surface splitting open like the earth after a great storm. Zalika awoke with a start, her heart racing. The line between the waking world and the spirit world was beginning to blur, and she could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. The fear that had been a whisper in the back of her mind now screamed in her ears. Something was coming, something that could not be stopped. The night was thick with the scent of earth and the weight of unspoken fears. Zalika awoke with a start, her chest heaving as her breath came in sharp gasps. Her body trembled, drenched in sweat, for the nightmares that had haunted her for days had reached their peak. But as she opened her eyes, the world seemed different, darker, colder. The fire in the hearth had almost died, and the room was bathed in an eerie glow, not from the moon, but from something else. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw him, Kul standing over the cracked gourd, his hands moving in a chant she did not recognize. His shadow, once simply a dark silhouette against the walls, now twisted and stretched in unnatural ways. It morphed into grotesque shapes, shapes that seemed to leer and writhe, as though alive with malice. Kule's voice, deep and commanding, cut through the silence. "You have invited me in, Zalika," he said softly, but there was no warmth in his tone. "Now you will see the truth." Zalika's eyes widened in horror. His form began to shift before her very eyes, the once human features melting into something darker, more monstrous. His eyes, black as the deepest night, glowed with a malevolent light, and his face twisted into a sneer. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Kule's lips curled into a cruel smile. "I am no mere man, Zalika. I am the spirit of the forest, sent by the ancient ones to test your village's strength. The protection your family once held was broken the moment you defied the sacred ways." The room seemed to shrink around her, the air thick with dread. Zalika's mind raced. How had she not seen it before? How had she been so blind? Her hospitality, her kindness, it had all been a trap, a test of the village's very soul. Kule stepped closer, his shadow growing longer, more menacing. "Your defiance, Zalika, has marked you. You invited me into your life, into your home, without consulting the elders, without respecting the sacred rules. You have set the stage for this village's doom." Tears welled in Zalika's eyes, and her body trembled as she took a step back. "No, I didn't know. I only wished to help." Kule's laughter echoed around the hut, harsh and mocking. "You were naive to think kindness would save you. The spirits are watching, and they do not forgive so easily." Zalika's heart raced. She could feel the weight of her ancestors' gaze upon her. She had broken the sacred bond, and now the spirits were angry. But within her, something stirred, something deep, something powerful. She remembered the stories her mother had told her, the lessons of strength and resilience passed down through the generations. She remembered the gourd, the symbol of her family's protection, now cracked and shattered. But its power was not gone. No, it had merely been hidden, waiting for the moment it would be needed. With shaking hands, Zalika reached for the gourd, her fingers brushing the smooth, carved surface. The cracks seemed to pulse with a faint light, as though responding to her touch. "I will not let you destroy my village," she said, her voice stronger now, filled with a fierce determination. Kule's eyes narrowed. "You think you can stop me? You, a mere mortal, standing against the darkness of the forest?" But Zalika, with newfound strength, held the gourd high, her voice rising in a chant of her own. "Ancestors, hear me. I call upon the spirits of the land, the protectors of our people. Grant me your power, your strength, and your courage. I will not let our traditions be forgotten." As she spoke, the air around her seemed to hum with energy. The fire flared up, casting long shadows on the walls. The ground beneath her feet trembled, as if the very earth was responding to her call. The spirits were answering. At that moment, Aunt Mwevu appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with concern. She had felt the disturbance in the air and had come running. "Zalika!" Aunt Mwevu cried, rushing to her side. "You are not alone in this. We will fight together." Aunt Mwevu, ancient and wise, raised her arms and began to chant in a language older than time itself. The ground seemed to shake beneath their feet, the wind howling with power. Zalika could feel the spirits gathering around them, their presence filling the air like the weight of centuries. Together they prepared for the ancient ritual, one that had been passed down through generations. It was a ritual of banishment, a way to send the evil spirits back to the forest where they belonged. But it would not be easy. The spirits were powerful, and Kul's true form was a force to be reckoned with. As Kul's monstrous shadow writhed and twisted, the room seemed to become a battleground. Light and darkness clashed, swirling around them in a chaotic dance. The fire from the hearth flickered, its light struggling against the overwhelming darkness that Kul brought with him. "You cannot win!" Kul bellowed, his voice a terrifying mix of anger and triumph. "I am the darkness. I am the forest. You are nothing." But Zalika did not falter. She stood tall, her heart steady with the strength of her ancestors. Her chant grew louder, and Aunt Mwevu's voice joined in, a deep and powerful harmony that resonated with the spirits of the land. The darkness seemed to recoil, as if it were being drawn back by an unseen force. Kul's form began to flicker, his power weakening under the combined strength of the ritual and the protective spirits. "You are nothing," Zalika repeated, her voice unwavering. "Your darkness will not claim us." With a final powerful cry, the ritual reached its peak. The spirits of the sacred forest, summoned by Zalika's courage and Aunt Mwevu's wisdom, surged forward, wrapping Kule in a circle of light. The darkness that had once consumed him was now pushed back, and his monstrous form began to shrink, his power dissolving into nothingness. The first rays of dawn began to pierce the darkness, breaking through the walls of the hut. As the light grew, Kul's form collapsed, his body disintegrating into smoke. With one final piercing scream, he was banished, returned to the forest from whence he came. As the sun rose, casting its golden light over the village, Zalika and Aunt Mwevu stood together, exhausted but victorious. The spirits had been appeased, the balance restored. But even as the village began to stir with the promise of a new day, Kule's voice echoed in Zalika's mind, a cryptic warning that would haunt her for years to come. "You may have won this battle, Zalika," Kule's voice whispered, his words carrying on the wind. "But if your village does not return to the traditions of old, greater evils will come, and they will be far worse than I ever was." The villagers gathered around, relieved but uncertain. The warning hung in the air like a shadow, a reminder of the delicate balance between the living and the spirits. Zalika stood before them, the weight of the past and future pressing upon her shoulders. The path ahead would not be easy. The village would need to honor its traditions, to listen to the whispers of the land, or face the wrath of spirits far older and more powerful than they could imagine. And so, the story of Kul, the spirit who had come to test them, became a legend, a lesson passed down through generations, a tale of how the village of Mboko had stood firm, how they had faced the darkness together, and how they had learned that the price of defying tradition was a cost too great to pay. The village would never forget. The first rays of dawn broke over the village of Mboko, but they did little to erase the signs of the night's terror. Zalika's hut stood in ruins, its walls cracked, its roof torn apart as though by a great force. The once proud gourd, a symbol of her family's lineage and protection, lay shattered, its pieces scattered like broken dreams on the ground. Yet amidst the destruction, there was a feeling of relief. For standing in the midst of the ruin, unscathed and resolute, were Zalika and Aunt Mwevu. Though the hut had been torn asunder, the women were untouched, their spirits unbroken. Their resilience shone brighter than the rising sun, and the villagers gathering in the village square looked upon them with awe and hope. Zalika's eyes, though weary from the ordeal, were full of determination. As she glanced at the villagers, she knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. Yet in the depths of her soul, she felt a shift, a deep understanding of her place in the world and of the strength that lies in unity and tradition. As the villagers slowly gathered around, Zalika lifted her voice, steady and strong. The night has passed, and with it the evil that sought to destroy us. But the lessons it carried must not be forgotten, she said, her voice carrying across the village. I will tell you the truth, so that we may never fall into darkness again. The villagers listened intently as Zalika recounted the horrors of the night, the arrival of Kul, the spirit in disguise, his malevolent intentions, and the ancient test he brought upon the village. Her words were filled with the weight of her fear, but also of the courage she had found within herself. The spirits of the sacred forest warned us, Zalika continued, her eyes scanning the faces of her people. Kule's message was clear. We have strayed too far from the old ways. We must honor our traditions, or we will face greater dangers still. The spirits are watching, and they will not be ignored. The villagers murmured among themselves, the weight of her words settling over them like a heavy cloak. But it was not just fear that gripped their hearts. It was a newfound understanding of the bond between them and the spirits that had watched over them for generations. The elders, wise with age and experience, stepped forward. Old Mama Nia, her face lined with wisdom and sorrow, raised her hands to the sky. We've heard the warning, Zalika, she said, her voice steady. Now we must make amends. We must cleanse our hearts and our village so that the spirits may see our devotion and our respect. Under the guidance of the elders, the village gathered to perform an ancient cleansing ritual. The air was thick with the scent of herbs, and the chanting of the elders filled the atmosphere, their voices rising in a steady rhythm. The villagers joined in, offering prayers and songs to the spirits of the sacred forest, asking for forgiveness and renewal. Zalika stood at the center of the circle, the fragments of the shattered gourd resting in her hands. As she offered them to the fire, she felt a sense of release, as though the weight of her mistakes and the village's were being lifted. The flames danced higher, their light flickering like the spirits themselves, and for the first time in many days, Zalika felt a peace settle in her heart. It is done, Mama Nia said quietly as the ritual ended. The spirits have heard us. As the flames died down and the villagers began to disperse, Zalika and Aunt Mwevu walked to a quiet corner of the village. There, Aunt Mwevu laid a gentle hand on Zalika's shoulder. My child, she said, her voice tender yet firm, you have grown, and you have learned. The journey you have walked is one that many will not understand. But you must always remember this. True strength comes not from defiance, but from humility and respect. Zalika lowered her head, the weight of her aunt's words settling within her. I was too quick to act, she admitted. I thought kindness alone would protect us, but I forgot the wisdom of our ancestors. I failed to see that the strength of our people lies in balance between compassion and tradition. Aunt Moevu smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. You have learned well, Zalika. It is not easy to admit our faults, but it is through this humility that we grow. You saved our village, and in doing so, you have shown all of us the true meaning of bravery. Zalika's heart swelled with gratitude, and she knew that the road ahead would not be without challenges. But with the lessons of the past guiding her, she felt ready to face whatever came next. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Zalika turned to the villagers who had gathered once more in the center of the village. We are stronger now, she said, her voice clear and resolute. We have faced darkness together, and we have emerged into the light. But let this be a lesson for all of us. The kindness we show must be rooted in wisdom, and we must never forget the traditions that bind us to the land and the spirits. The villagers nodded, their faces solemn but filled with a renewed sense of purpose. We will honor the spirits, old Mama Nia declared. We will preserve our traditions, and we will teach our children the importance of both kindness and respect. The winds of change had swept through the village, leaving behind a spirit of unity and hope. The villagers knew that the road ahead would require more than just words. It would require action. But they were ready, for they had seen the power of tradition and the strength of the bonds they shared. As the day wore on, the village felt a renewed sense of purpose. The chants of gratitude filled the air, and the spirits of the sacred forest seemed to hum in approval. The villagers worked together to repair the damage done by the night's events, their hands moving with the rhythm of unity. But even as peace was restored, the memory of Cooley's warning lingered in the hearts of all. The spirits had been appeased, for now. But the villagers knew that they must remain vigilant, for the balance between kindness and tradition was delicate, and the spirits would not hesitate to test them again. And so, the village of Mboko, under the rising sun, stood strong. The lesson of the night had been learned, and the villagers vowed to honor their traditions, to live with wisdom, and to walk the path of unity. The spirits had spoken, and they would listen, for the heart of the village beat in harmony with the land, the ancestors, and the spirits themselves. The cycle had turned, but the story of Zalika's journey would live on, passed down through generations, a tale of redemption, strength, and the power of tradition.